Welcome, and thank you for standing by. Today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer portion of today's conference. At that time, you may press star 1 on your phone to ask a question. I would now like to turn the conference over to your host, Brian Beams. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Beams. I'm an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service. I'm located at the Northern New Jersey office. Also with us today is my colleague, Anthony Sargis. Anthony is located at the Commercial Service office in Connecticut. On behalf of the U.S. Commercial Service, the Connecticut, New Jersey, San Diego, and Imperial District Export Councils, and OFS, FITEL, we all welcome you to today's webinar titled Deemed Exports. A couple items before we get started. Be sure you are connected using both your telephone and online WebEx platform, which enables you to see the visual presentation. All telephone lines are currently on mute. We will open the lines up for questions at the end of the presentation. We will also take questions submitted through the chat or Q&A features on the WebEx platform. Finally, our web address has changed. Please note that all U.S. Commercial Service information can now be found on www.trade.gov. I'd like to take a minute to inform you about the U.S. Commercial Service. We are the trade and investment arm of your federal government. We are a division of the International Trade Administration. Our mission is to promote U.S. exports, protect U.S. interests abroad, and facilitate foreign direct investment into America. We have offices all around the world. Domestically, we are in 108 offices nationwide. Internationally, our offices are located within the U.S. embassies and consulates in over 70 countries. Here's a list of our remaining webinars for the series. All 10 webinars will be recorded and presentations will be forwarded to you every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jose Abrantes with OFS FITEL. Jose is the Senior Manager for Global Trade Compliance at OFS. In this capacity, he oversees the company's 6 U.S. locations and 5 worldwide manufacturing sites located in China, Denmark, Germany, Morocco, and Russia. Jose implemented an export and import compliance program with an emphasis on training and awareness, technology controls, customer screening, record keeping, as well as customer programs such as duty, drawbacks, and product classification reviews. Jose is a graduate of Brigham Young University and is a member of the Connecticut District Export Council. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Jose. Sir?
Thank you very much, Brian. And thank you for those that attended last week's webinar and decided to join in again today, even though you knew that I was the presenter again. So I appreciate the second chance that you gave me. Today we're talking about deemed exports, and I showed this slide last week just to show a little bit of the complexity of the company I work for right now. Like Brian mentioned, we have 7 locations in the U.S. plus 5 overseas. OFS FITEL is a U.S. corporation, but we are owned by a much larger Japanese conglomerate, Furukawa Electric Company, and Furukawa has its own other subsidiaries throughout the world. So there's a lot of movement of goods, technology between different sites as our products are very similar. Our technologies, manufacturing know-how tend to be able to easily interact with each other. So that makes it the challenge to understand the export regulations around all these controls that we need to put in place. So start with the very basic, what's an export? The definition of an export is something that is shipped or brought to another country to be sold or traded. Examples of export of rice being shipped from Vietnam to be sold in many countries. So typically, you put it in the box, you ship it out of the country, that's an export. Traditionally, that's what most people would understand as an export. The definitions on it, send goods or services to another country for sale, or a commodity or article or service sold abroad. And that kind of gets a little bit more into the theme of it. So beyond just something that we put in a box, services could also be considered an export. Now, for export just of a technology point of view, an export can be an actual shipment or a transmission, for instance, software, to another country, or any release of technology or source code to a foreign national. And this is the concept that we're going to work on with a little bit today. So technology, we're talking about specific, proprietary, not publicly available information that is used for development, production, or use of a product. That's what we're talking about, technology that we want to look at. So beyond your traditional export of an actual shipment or transmission if it's a software to another country, we're also talking about release of technology or source code to a foreign national. Okay, so those two things count as exports. Now, the deemed export rule as defined is the release of controlled technology and information to a non-U.S. person regardless of where the export takes place. So that goes beyond the transmission to a foreign country. Now we're talking about if you are giving this technology to a non-U.S. person, could be in Connecticut. Someone's coming in, I'm giving them some technology, that's considered an export. So if the technology is shared, transmitted, released to a non-U.S. person in Connecticut, that is considered an export. Now, this concept sometimes is easy for us to grasp. The other ones is a little harder, especially if you first time you're kind of hearing of this. So the idea is if you gave the manufacturing know-how to somebody in Connecticut, just say a Chinese national, he now has the ability to go back to China and with that technology make the product there. So that is now a full export of technology to China. So U.S. origin technology, software, or technical data released to a foreign national in the United States will be considered an export to that individual's country. So in the case I gave before, I gave some technology in Connecticut to a Chinese national that is considered an export to China, even though that transaction happened between two individuals that were sitting in Connecticut. Again, could be China, could be a Canadian. Say a Canadian, I go to upstate in the U.S. side by Niagara Falls. I see a Canadian person meeting for lunch, and I share some U.S. technology. On the U.S. side, doesn't have to be in Canada, I am sharing technology to that Canadian national, so a non-U.S. person, that is considered an export to Canada. All right, so that's the concept that we need you to think about. So now we need to look at the definition of a U.S. person. And the U.S. person is defined, typically there's variances over the years between ITAR and Commerce. Now they're trying to kind of consolidate more into one. A U.S. citizen or national, so you were either born in the U.S. or you became a U.S. citizen, you are considered a U.S. person. That's an easy one. Now, if you are a lawful permanent resident in the U.S., let's say you have a permanent green card, you are also considered a U.S. person. And then the other ones are someone has received a political asylum in the U.S., someone has been granted a refugee status in the U.S., or someone that has become legalized to reside in the U.S. Under the U.S. legalization program in 1986. These groups of individuals are considered a U.S. person in the eyes of U.S. export controls. And so it means that if I'm going to, again, go to have a meeting in Connecticut with a an individual that was born in China, but he now is a permanent resident in the U.S. He's still not a U.S. citizen, but he has a permanent green card, and now I'm transferring that technology to him. That is not an export. He is now a U.S. person, okay? So that is the distinction between your status. And I think the reason is because these 5 groups of individuals, the assumption by the U.S. government is they're not going anywhere. They're in the U.S., they have a permanent resident status, or they are U.S. citizens. They made this country their home, and the chances of that technology being exported someplace else, it's less likely. On the other hand, a foreign national is an individual who has not been granted a permanent residence or a permanent green card or is not in a protected status, like a political refugee or asylum holder. So it could be a terrorist, could be a business traveler, or even someone that is working legally in the U.S. under a working visa but not a permanent status. So those group of individuals, there are, in the eyes of the law, a foreign national. So you may have in your plants a variety of individuals that have working visas that allow to work in the U.S. that we need to consider if we are transferring any export technology under the deemed export rule to them, if they are, as nationals of certain countries, if they're allowed to receive that or not. So something for you to really think of in the structure. We'll go a little bit more into that, of things that you can do. So transfer technology. So transfer technology really can do anything. It could be, an old CD, a thumb drive, blueprints, paper, schematics, internet, email, well, fax, if anyone uses those these days. But a meeting, a phone, just a gathering of people, a formal training, anything that technology is being transferred could be an export depending who the audience is on the other side. So as you are, and we transfer technology every day on our day-to-day basis, but as you think about it, you need to think who is the recipient of that technology, and you kind of have to evaluate the process behind it. So an easy way to think of, if the technology or software relates to a control item, then an export license may be required. So in here is an example of our laser cavities that they go into the component of an optical fiber laser. And these cavities are controlled under the commerce. So if I'm going to ship this laser cavity to Germany, there's no license required. I don't need to worry about it. If I'm to export the same cavity to Mali, now I will need an export license. The same thing if I'm exporting that laser cavity to China. Okay? So that is the actual commodity goods. And I didn't want to put a blueprint of a controlled item on this presentation because I didn't know who my audience was as far as foreign nationals versus U.S. person. So I think it's a drawing of a Lego, blueprint on the Lego. And we'll go into that. So the second item is public domain. So technology available to the public may not be controlled. So if it's something that is in public domain, then it's not controlled. You can share. If they can go to the internet and just find it because it's available to everyone, that's not controlled. But now let's say that is the blueprint for my laser cavity that is controlled to go to exported to go to Mali and China, but not controlled to go to Germany. I can share in the U.S. the schematic, the blueprints of that laser cavity to any foreign national, German foreign national, without a license, because the product itself does not require a license to go to Germany, so the technology does not require a license to go to Germany. Not always the case. There's some exceptions, so you do need to review the regulations, because the technology and the product have a different ECCN. Let's say optical fiber for me is 5A991 and technology 5E991, and there may be different controls for your ECCN based on the product itself or the commodity. So you do need to verify that. Now, if I'm transferring that technology in Connecticut to someone from Mali or someone from China, that I'm showing them the blueprints, I don't need to give them the blueprints, by the way. Just show them the blueprints and them have an opportunity to look at it. That is considered an export to Mali and an export to China, and therefore an export license of that technology transfer would be required in both the Mali foreign national and the Chinese foreign national cases. There are some allowances for some types of academic and scientific research. So if that is something that you do, you need to make sure that you follow within the scientific research allowances. One of the typical things that it's go is it has to be for fundamental research. You can't pick and choose, I'm not going to publish because I want to control. I want to make it a commercial item and I'm going to make some money out of this one. It has to be truly fundamental research that is going to be published without any restrictions to everyone. So there are some guidelines. Don't just take it on and take off with it. There are some allowance for fundamental research, academic, scientific research, but you got to make sure that you are within those boundaries. So this is going back to a few examples. So you may have a meeting, and this meeting could be, let's say, being held in Connecticut, just because I'm here. We have five individuals in that meeting, and we're looking at some blueprints of an amazing idea, as you can tell. And so with this five nationals sitting at the table, this five individuals sitting at the table, we have 4 U.S. persons, and we have 1 Canadian foreign national. The question here is an export license required for the Canadian national to be allowed to look at these prints? Well, is it or not? There's very little controls on the commerce side for Canada. Obviously, if he's an ITAR, he's not allowed there unless he has a license. So it's something that we need to think about. What is the technology? Is it an ITAR? Is it commerce? Okay, if it's ITAR, the answer is always no foreign nationals are allowed to have access to that technology unless they have a license from the Department of State. If it's a commerce item, then you need to review, does this product or does this technology require a license to be transferred to Canada? If it doesn't, then this meeting can proceed without any issues and without any problems. Okay. Now, this is an example that I have in my company all the time because we do have facilities in Germany, Morocco, Denmark, China, Russia. We own by a Japanese company. We are American, and also we have facilities in Mexico. So we may have a conference call or a meeting where we are all discussing a particular product, a particular technology, or how to troubleshoot manufacturing on a particular product that everybody kind of makes. Are we allowed that? Are we allowed to have that conversation? Now, just because everyone here in this room is an employee of OFS FITEL does not mean that they are allowed to be in this call. So if an optical fiber cable, which is most of it EER99 or some of it 5A991.D, is allowed for any of these countries, including China and Russia, without an export license, unless it's an individual listed on the U.S. entity or any of the lists. So for an OFS employee for optical fiber cable, sure, this meeting is allowed, has been reviewed by compliance, and we are good to go. Now, we do have meetings where we're talking about products that, under commerce, that would require a license to go to Morocco, China, and Russia. So in those particular calls or meetings, we need to make sure that foreign nationals of those countries are not on the call or are kicked out of the call before we can proceed talking about commodities that would require that. So we have done that. We have done the times in where we meetings that we have a first session of the meeting that everybody is allowed, and the technology that we discussed and is not controlled. Now, remember, as we're presenting, as the U.S. person is presenting this, there's deemed exports happening every single time he's showing a blueprint just by exposing it there. So this is all export. It's an export to Germany, an export to Morocco, to Denmark, China, Russia. The question that you have to ask is it allowed? Is this an allowed export? For our optical fiber cable, sure, it's allowed, no license required. For some of our dual-use items of fiber that go into in a plane or could go into a gyroscope, no. And that some of those individuals will not be allowed to attend that meeting, including our parent company, sometimes in some cases. So now if this is an ITAR discussion, now we need to remove, everybody else needs to be out of there. And we're in a position where we have a parent company that we say, no, we cannot share this information with you because it's controlled under the ITAR, and we are not allowed to talk with them about that. And feel free to, if you have any ideas, thoughts, scenarios that come to you throughout this presentation, feel free to ask in the end. Now, this happens often. And let's say that you have a site tour by a group of students from your local university. Let's say for us, UConn comes in and do a tour. Well, within those students, you have an international group of students. And this is also a quiz on flags, by the way, to make sure that everyone understands what flags that we're putting over there. But so of those 7 students that we identified as citizenship, we're talking about Cuba, U.S., China, Mexico, UK, Brazil, and Canada. Now, a simple site tour may or may not be a deemed export. Depends on what they have access to on your tour. Are they going to go through the manufacturing floor? Are they going to look at products that they can conceive how to make it based by looking at only? So, again, you can design a tour based on the group of nationals that are with you, that is no license required tour. You don't just say, oh, don't allow any Chinese nationals or Cuban nationals into my facility. It depends. Make it have a completely safe tour without any exposure to U.S. technology, without any deemed exports, depending on how you design the tour. I had a Chinese customer that wanted to visit our plant in Thailand where we manufacture the U.S.-controlled laser cavities. And they wanted to go a tour, and most likely it's because they were very interested in reverse engineering it and figuring out how we do it. So you can use the U.S. export controls to also protect your IP. So what our response was, well, you can come to Thailand. If you want to have a feel of the manufacturing facility and the conditions that the product is made of, we can do a tour for you on the outside of the perimeter so you can have the feel of the plant, but we're not going to allow you to go through every aisle and see the production, different stages of production. So that is something that you need to think about is what am I giving access to these individuals? And then if I go through your factory, I probably can go through your factory and get me out of there. It's like, yeah, it was nice, but I won't be able to manufacture your product afterwards. Now, in this particular, the Chinese engineers that were coming to visit Thailand, they knew exactly how to manufacture the process, and they would actually learn quite a bit from being exposed to the technology and the manufacturing know-how. Now, that's not something that you're going to use. Oh, this person can visit all they want because they're not going to learn anything from it. That is not something that you need to, that you should be the judge of it. Just focus on what's their nationality and is this product allowed to be exported to that country without a license or not. And this is something that very primitive, but it works for us in one of our facilities. We have a commingled facility where ITAR and commerce is manufactured on the same floor. And this is just a sign at the time. A layman person probably go through the line and say, okay, there's absolutely no difference between a commerce and an ITAR. But we put these signs in the labs or in the closed areas or when ITAR manufacturing is taking place. So if there's a tour that was to take place at that time, they know not to go into that area. Even that, so sometimes they will be allowed to and sometimes they wouldn't be allowed to. So it triggers at least people internally to know, oh, I cannot go into that area. And if it's an area that is ITAR happens all the time, which we also have, then that area is properly marked and no visitors can come in at any time into those areas. Other places where things can go wrong, trade shows. If you're any like my company, we like to go to trade shows. We like to go and meet our customers, and we like to brag about how amazing our products are and what are new things that we have innovated, new things coming out. That is a hot spot for potential deemed exports. So not only you need to be aware who the audience is, but you also to make sure that you limit the information to what's publicly available, public domain, marketing information, and you don't go into the nitty-gritty of how things are made or certain features that may be perceived as controlled. If it's something you wouldn't mind, you just put it on your marketing brochures and put it on the website, the information is probably okay. But the moment you start going more and more into details into your product, as a savvy person, competitor, or may start asking you very specific questions and you get more involved in the conversation, that is a key point for a potential deemed export in a trade show. So make sure that your salespeople, the people marketing people that attend the trade shows, that they know there are limitations on what they can share. Because you won't know. A lot of times you won't know if this person is a foreign national or a U.S. person. Unless you see their actual residency status, you won't know for sure. So you may look like, oh, this guy looks Canadian. I better be careful what I'm sharing with them. You won't know for sure, okay? So you got to be careful with that. So export controls are not just ITAR versus not ITAR. So you have to really look at your product and identify, okay, I have ITAR products where an export license is always required. Technical data must be controlled, and no foreign nationals can have access to it unless I have an export license. And I've done that where I've gotten export licenses for foreign nationals that were working for us that we wanted them to work on certain ITAR products or projects. And so we've got the licenses, and then they are allowed to as much access as a U.S. person. You may have dual use controlled items, and that's clearly what commerce tends to control, which is items that can be used for a military application or a commercial application. They have this dual role. So in that, a license review is always required before the technical data need to be controlled. So before you transfer that technical data to anyone, any individual, you need to understand if that product requires a license to that destination. And then you may have some products like ours, our basic telecommunication products, they're really not controlled. A technical data really doesn't need to be controlled that much, with exception of a few certain countries. And so we need to, our level of control is a lot less, especially as we talk between sister companies. So we have to put different levels. Don't just think of ITAR versus not ITAR. Really, I think the big problem is this dual use controlled items where there's a lot of some countries you're allowed to, other countries you're not allowed to, creates a gray area that can be hard to manage sometimes. Yeah, I went back. All right. So this is a typical manufacturing plant where you'd have people assembly lines, you have the manager, site manager, you have some additional maybe quality other people, and you have office workers, right? Again, an export can happen in your plant right now, today, right? And so you may have a plant manager that is Canadian, and that may be okay. He needs to have access to all the technology in the facility. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But he does, then is he allowed to, as a Canadian national, is he allowed to, we had a manager that he was in the U.S. under a NAFTA visa, which I didn't even know existed until he joined in. He was not a plant manager, but he was one of the managers on the plant. So you would have to figure out with that NAFTA visa what he was allowed to or not to do. Then you have people on your assembly lines. In our assembly line, a lot of times you may have people that are temporary working visas or that get renewed every year or every couple of years, and they are allowed to work in the U.S., but they don't have a permanent residency status. So you again, which is fine, but you need to understand what are the technical data that they're exposed to and what are the controls that they're exposed to. So if the product you're making requires a license to go to Brazil or requires a license to go to Mexico, so those two individuals either cannot be there or they need a license to be there. Now, if the product you're making does not require a license to go to Brazil or does not require a license to go to Mexico, then you're fine. And again, they are not U.S. persons. They're not a Brazilian or a Mexican that now have a permanent green card. There are individuals that never got to that permanent status yet or have not gotten their citizenship. So where they were born, it does not matter. It matters what is their current status now. Okay, so you got to make sure to understand that part very clearly. If they were born in Brazil and born in Mexico, but they are now U.S. citizens or have a permanent green card, then they're completely allowed to be there. I would have changed their little heads to with the American flag. They're a U.S. person in the eyes of the U.S. law. Again, office workers, different procurement team, shipping clerks. They may have accounting. They may have different access to the technology. You need to understand if they are a UK national or a Chinese national, are they allowed to have access to the hard drive? Maybe they're in finance. But when they go into your system, they can click on everything. They can click on the where you keep all your drawings. And now something that you need a license to go to China, this person may have access to it. It doesn't have to go there, But if he wants to, he could go there, and that would be a deemed export if you don't isolate that technical data for that Chinese national that works in your procurement department or your accounting department or something like that. Okay? Same thing with everyone in this room. Make sure you are aware of your audience. Make sure you are aware of your controls for that audience. So protect the technology. You can develop a technology control plan. If you're in ITAR, you probably already have one. But develop a technology control plan not just around the ITAR, but develop a technology control plan about the different levels. You may have to segregate your access to different nationals. These groups of individuals can access everything in the site. These groups of individuals are only allowed to access this other box. So you have to think about, from a technology point of view, how you prevent deemed exports to happen in your place. So what you're trying to control. So you have control technology versus what's not controlled. And this may vary from product to product. Maybe you want to control the blueprints, the schematics, a bill of materials in a few cases if there's a key secret ingredient that makes a distinction. Then not controlled, public or available information is fine, marketing information, the bill of materials in some cases. For us, we make optical fiber, so a lot of the bill of materials is similar with exception of maybe key ingredients that makes this other fiber different from a dual use or from an ITAR perspective. So a lot of times we use the same coding, so that's why we don't necessarily control all the bill of materials. But your product may be different. So you need to make a distinction. You have to have a meeting like what I'm going to control, what I'm not going to control, and how I'm going to manage that on the site here. So other risks for you to consider, foreign travel by U.S. employees. Again, a deemed export doesn't have to happen in the U.S. It could happen anywhere. So as your employees travel globally, they may have technical data with them. They may share technical data during meetings, or they may leave the laptop on while in the conference room in between meetings and go to the bathroom, and now it left something on that allowed other people to have access to view your drawings. Vendors and suppliers, as you send out maybe drawings to your vendors for them to manufacture a component of your that goes into a product. If that component is controlled for some reason, you got to make sure where that vendor and supplier is, not just overseas, but domestically. You have to make sure that they're allowed, especially when it comes to ITAR, that they're allowed to receive that technical data. But also, if the information that you are sharing can potentially be controlled, then you need to make sure that you are allowed to share with that vendor and supplier. And again, you may be a supplier in Germany, but you may have 3 Iranian nationals working there, so you have to understand if it's a controlled product, if it's controlled technology, you need to understand who you're delivering that technical data to. Same with dealers and distributors. A lot of times we overshare information about our products with dealers and distributors. They may be in charge of repairing your machinery when it goes down, so they need to have intricate knowledge of your sub-assemblies and components and how to put everything together. Well, you may have to have licenses for certain dealers and distributors if you are oversharing technology to them that would require for that country. So just because you have an agreement with them or because even if they are part of your own company, that does not mean that you're allowed to share everything that you need. And then IT access to your technical data. We talked a little bit about that within your own facility. Do you have technical data that is accessed, everyone with a laptop can access, and does everyone with your laptop should access that? So what I've developed was we'll go to HR, and we have a list that we maintain regularly of all the employees working in a given facility, and we also have another column for their citizenship status. Well, are they a U.S. person? If they're a U.S. person or permanent green card holder, that is there, and so these people are clear to work pretty much on everything. And then if there's, we have this other group of individuals that have a working visa, and they keep trying every year they renew it. Then maybe the application for permanent is ongoing, but they still have that status. So how do we segregate these individuals? If there's different projects to consider, who's going to work on this project? You can't just move the workforce from one project to the other without making sure that everyone that is now working on this new project is allowed to, from a U.S. export control perspective, to work on that. So that list, let's say the employee that had a permanent, had a working visa now gets a permanent green card. Then we update his status. We move his access to given a broader access to other things. And then as employees leave, new employees are hired, we keep that list, and we know. And the project manager, when he's starting a new project, he goes into the work pool and he knows what's the 20 individuals that are going to work on this project, and we need to clear to make sure that they're all okay. And a lot of times everybody's okay. If you have everybody is a U.S. national or a U.S. person, then that's not a problem for the most part. But you may have individuals that are not. My company will end up having managers that are in charge of a subdivision of the whole company, executive managers, but they're Danish. So we can tell them a few things, but we cannot give them everything. So we need, even with the structure, it's fine for them to be the manager, but we cannot tell them there's things that we have to restrict from them. Again, always keep in mind with that. And that was my presentation. Brian, if you want to open up for questions.
Jose, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. We're going to ask Sarah, the operator, to open it up for questions, and we did have a couple that came in as well through the Q&A box. So let's give Sarah a chance to prompt the questions, and then we'll address a few of those that came in written. Sarah?
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1. Unmute your line and speak your name clearly when prompted by the system. Your name is required to announce your open line. To withdraw a question, press *2. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and unmute your line. Stand by for questions on the phone line.
Thank you, Sarah. While we're waiting for that question, the questions are coming. We had a couple good questions. We'll kind of start in a little bit reverse here, and I think you addressed this mainly on your last 2 points. But, how do you handle equipment manufacturers wanting to remote in for repair and upgrade or do health monitoring on systems? And you kind of talked about that. But I think that's, a really good question, and it's interesting maybe if you could talk about it in a little bit more detail, since, everything's kind of connected to the internet nowadays and you have people kind of accessing things. How do you control who's accessing it and who should be accessing it?
Well, it depends how much access you're given to. So if there's a way of you controlling the access or restricting the access, you can come into your system, but by coming into my system and logging into my VPN, you don't necessarily get access to my ITAR folder that is password protected or that is only restricted even within my own facility of who can have access. So you can compartmentalize things that you can give access to individuals to do certain things, but try to keep it the control data in a way that is isolated for only those individuals that you've given access. Again, it's about compartmentalizing it, setting up tiers, and try to focus the need for that outside person to only have limited access to what you can give. You don't need to give access.
And Jose, if you have a vendor that's accessing a piece of machinery, is that something that when that person needs to access the machinery, say it runs ITAR parts, right? Do you log that information as far as record keeping, and do they have to ask permission when they're kind of accessing that piece of machinery to, let's say, just do an upgrade on it, a software patch or something like that? Well, let's say the machinery does run ITAR parts, just for this case.
You may need a license depending if they have access to manufacturing know-how. The one that comes quick to my mind is someone that wants to repair your printer, and you have a memory that keep all your files there on your printer, and including ITAR data that is there. First, you need to make sure that doesn't happen, that it gets cleaned up on a regular basis and nothing stays there. But if someone is servicing your printer and have access to the last 100 jobs that were done in there, and they can pull that data, that's an issue. That a license may be required. So you may need to look at, when we do that with some of our suppliers, is that we have a letter that's saying, this information is ITAR. Are you allowed to work on this? Are you allowed, do you have the capability, technical capability to receive this technical data and control it within your own house? If that's third-party vendor, if they're a U.S. vendor, then probably you may not have an issue here at all. But if it's a foreign vendor, then a license may be required depending on what they have access to. So again, you need to compartmentalize. You need to know what they're going to get exposed when they come into your system and make that decision.
Thank you, Jose. And I'm going to just follow up on this question. I think it was related to this slide. Controlled parts are not hidden from view in this plant. I think it was to clarify. And then I think the follow-up on that question, some have argued that a 10-foot distance is sufficient for people that are unable to discern the details in order to reproduce thoughts. Sorry, that was cut off on the bottom for me.
It may be sufficient, right? Depending what kind of level of manufacturing you're doing. And again, to the example that I gave of visiting the Chinese engineers visiting my factory in Thailand, they're still going around the perimeter of the factory. They would see the production, but they couldn't see how things really were done to the point that we needed to control. So IP, you want to control it as well, just as much. The 10-foot rule, it really depends of what you can get by the 10 feet. I would revert that to your own manufacturing process, and for you to understand, can I understand what you're doing and how you're doing it from 10 feet, 20 feet, or at all. You may say, they'll figure out how to do this by going here. The FBI does offer training to come for, they'll come to your facility free of charge, and they have a couple trainings on visitors, inspection of visitors, inside training. A couple stories that they give that I think that at least the guy that I like to give is the visitor that had a tie and it was dipping the tie in a chemical so they can study it later on when they got back. Or the guy that was visiting a airplane engine factory and have double-sided duct tape on his shoe, and he was tapping on the shavings just so he can study the metal alloy compositions of those engines. Again, you have to understand what is key to your what is controlled. Is that metal alloy enough? Is that what is significant? Makes a big difference. So that's something that you would want to control. You want to make sure it's not accessible.
All right. Thank you, Jose. Yeah. We have a question or two more, but let's see if we have any questions from Sarah on the phone line.
Yes. Our first question comes from Morgan. Your line is open.
Hi.
Hello,
thank
Morgan.
you, Jose. So, Jose, a quick question. It's like twofold. The first is, say, we're having a conference and there are several different foreign nationals in it that have access to information. Do we need an individual license for each different national for that situation, or would we just have, if we had one license for that conference, like how does that work? And also, same situation, like if we have, say we have a contract that we're doing, a commercial contract, and we have a license to work with a certain vendor. If we bring on another vendor, do we need another license for that same contract, that same project?
Okay. So two different potential answers there. The first one is, if it's a conference that is open to the public and anyone can sign up for, it may fall under the public domain or kind of the information, and no license maybe is required. Again, not knowing exactly the specifics on that. Or if it is proprietary information that you're giving out that is controlled again, is it controlled technical data? If it is controlled technical data, typically you don't have it for a country. A license you don't get a broad license. This applies to both. For I can transfer this technology to China or to Mexico. You say I can transfer this technology to this particular entity or this particular individual that is a Chinese or a Mexican national. A license, so it's not a blanket license for country, but it's specific, targeted, and also specific to that technology. You cannot say, well, now I have a new product that I want them to make. Well, that requires a new license because the first license was for product A, and now if you're having them make product C, a new license would be required for that product as well. So you have license is country specific, is end user specific, and is product specific, one license. So it's not broad for everything. It doesn't cover all your products. It doesn't cover all nationals of China or all entities in China.
So you might need multiple licenses for the same project, essentially.
Yes. So, for instance, if I had two Japanese nationals working on an ITAR project, I would need to have a license for each of those individuals, or I would have a license for in this case, it's just one company. But if I had multiple companies working on the project, then I would have multiple licenses.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Sarah, do we have any other questions from the phone line?
We do, but again, as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 and unmute your line. But our last question comes from Tran Ying. Your line is open.
Hello. Hi, thank you for the presentation. And you mentioned the dual control. I also posted my question in the Q&A, but I will speak up anyway. And so apparently, right now I'm working at a university, and we have a potential beam export here, and we have a student from India, and it's likely that the student will be engaged in a project that has items controlled both under the ITAR and the EAR. So in that situation, do we need to pursue two separate licenses, one from the BIS and another from the State Department, for, let's say, from the same technology that is controlled under both entities?
So you may have a product or a project that has some components that control in the commerce and certain controls, some product or part of the project is controlled under ITAR. We have that in our facility where lower initial assembly is commerce and then the final assemblies are ITAR. You can compartmentalize so the individual only works on one on the control side of it, and you need a license from commerce. But if the person needs to have access to both EAR technology, control technology, and ITAR technology, then he needs two licenses. He needs a license from the partner state for the ITAR portion of the project, and he needs a license from the partner commerce for the commerce license, portion of the product. So yes, so two licenses would be state doesn't have jurisdiction to license commerce products and vice versa.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Jose. And actually, just as you were mentioning the FBI, I'll send a link out a few years ago, Jose. It has to be 4 or 5 years now. The Made in America film. If you Google search the FBI export controls Made in America, there's a really good short film. It's probably 35 minutes, Jose, or so, and then some interviews on the backside from some export compliance managers. It's really well done. I'll send a link out to that. But as you mentioned, the FBI earlier. They put together a great kind of film on export controls. All right, let's see. We have another question. This is kind of the first question that came in, Jose. Deemed export concerns come up often in our company regarding plant tours. What are your thoughts on nobody from an embargo country can enter? And then I guess the second part of this question is, well, we talked about this already. How far away from a controlled part is considered, should be considered? I think we kind of talked about that. Maybe you can hit the first part of that question then on the embargoed countries.
Okay. So embargoed countries, should you restrict someone from North Korea, Cuba, Syria to do a planned tour? Again, the question goes back to what they are going to be exposed. You may have someone coming into your facility, and maybe you have a visitor center, an area where they can sit there and have a meeting, a presentation that is basically marketing. And then depends, you may have a tour that is more in-depth or one that is, broader. If you can design a tour where you're confident that no transfer technology takes place, and it's possible depending on your facility, then there's no reason for you to not allow a Cuban student or a student from North Korea or Iran to come and have a tour with the rest of their students, with the rest of the students. Now, if you feel like the moment they come in, they are going to get something that is a transfer technology, there's going to be a deemed export, and there's no way about it, then maybe you want to prevent that. Again, it depends how your factory is designed. It depends how how easy it is to transfer technology on your product. Can you have a tour of a vine? If you are an agriculture student, can you go and tour a vineyard and just walk around and not really get anything out of it? No transfer technology potentially there? Maybe. So again, you have to take that serious. Where are they going to be exposed at? Is going to be any transfer technology? If there's no transfer technology, then there's no reason to prevent someone from an embargo country to have the tour. But that's something that I would consider very, very, very seriously about it. To be honest, it would not be a bad policy. But don't just, depending on your product, that may not be the only thing they need to worry about. So those are not only 5 countries that you need to worry about. If you have a dual-use control product, you may have to have a broader net of who is allowed to or not, or what kind of restrictions you have.
All right, Jose, thank you. Sarah, do we have any final questions? We're 1 minute past here. And we
have no questions in queue.
All right, so that's going to do it for today. Jose, thank you so much for giving our 2 presentations over the last couple of weeks. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. You're one of our really good members of the Connecticut District Export Council, and we really appreciate your time today. I will get a note out hopefully tomorrow. Maybe we don't have to wait till Friday this week with the copy of the recording as soon as it's available. And we'll also get a copy of the presentation to everyone in a PDF format, as well as I will send a link to that FBI film, Made in America, for everyone to take a look at. Everyone enjoy the rest of the week. We will see everyone next week. Take care.
And thank you for your participation in today's conference. You may disconnect at this time.